Have you noticed if your child has a tendency to grab things from you or get things from their playmates without permission, or when they're starting to get mad, if they stamp their feet or yell really loudly or even pinch or push? And these are just examples of their impulses. And today I'm going to try to talk about ways to help them control it. So let's get talking. Hello po sa inyong lahat! I'm Teacher Kaye, and if you're new here, I'm a certified speech-language pathologist. But if you're a returning subscriber, welcome, welcome! I'm so happy na nandito po tayo ulit. Magkakasama tayo for another week. In my 2 episodes about screen time, I think I mentioned more than once either the terms impulsiveness or impulse control. And so I wanted to talk about it today. So ano ba ang impulse control? Pag-usapan muna natin kung ano yung impulses or impulsivity. Ito yung when we act without thinking. And it's very natural that babies start out being impulsive because there's nothing else that they know how to do except to follow instinctually their urges, what they want. So it is the job of the adults around the children to teach them how to control these impulses. So some of the natural impulses of babies are the ones that I mentioned earlier, like grabbing things that they want. Obviously, they don't know how to ask permission yet. Shouting very loudly when they're upset, or pushing people away. Actually, pushing is a gesture which is natural to show that you're rejecting something. You don't want it near your body. It becomes troublesome kapag nag-reach na siya sa point na nakakasakit na siya ng either self niya or ng others. How do you mean nakakasakit ng self yung pushing away? Sometimes they do it with so much force, they knock themselves off balance, and that could be dangerous if they're not seated in, a safe space. And yung nakakasakit ng iba, self-explanatory. Kapag nasaktan ka na nila, nasaktan na nila yung kalaro nila, it's not safe. So we want to always think of their safety and the safety of the people around them first. Kung hindi kasi mabigyan ng pansin yung impulse control and we just allow them to think that how they're doing things is okay, there have been studies that show that lack of impulse control or generally self-regulation, and that's how you control yourself. For today, I'm focusing on impulse control. Sinasabi ng studies that children who don't learn how to control their impulses have less chances to have success in academic performance later on and have a higher percentage of getting involved in criminal activity or substance abuse and things like that. Yikes. How does this reflect in our daily life? So, yung mga batang kinaiinisan ng mga kalaro kasi hindi niya turn pero sisingit siya. Or hindi siya nung tinawag ng teacher pero i-blurt out niya yung answer. For example, if hindi mo na-control yung impulse mo, ikaw siguro yung tipong sisingit sa pila. Or yung tipong driver na, wala akong pakialam, basta ako mauuna. So, cut ka ng cut on the roads. So, hindi ka lang nakakainis, unsafe ka pa. We don't want our children to grow up to be these kinds of people, diba? So, let's talk about ways by which we can start to teach them to control their impulses. Number 1 is we want to replace the unwanted behavior. For example, nakita mong nag-grab na naman yung anak mo ng toy sa kapatid niya. Siyempre, maiinis yung kapatid. So, iyakan, away yan for a bit. When you see that, don't just say, bad yan, or that's not nice, or stop it. Because after that, yes, baka matigilan sila dahil sa emotional response mo, but what will they do now if they want something? They want to get that item. So we want to teach them ways. So some starting gestures that we first teach children when we want them to request properly or to request appropriately is when we see their hands starting to outstretch, we take their hand and flip it over. Then you give the verbal prompt na gusto or want that or give me. or borrow, kahit na anong salita nung gusto nyong matutunan nila that will accompany the gesture of asking and waiting. So that's one of the starting things that you can do to replace the unwanted behavior of grabbing is by teaching them to ask properly or to ask nicely. If lagpas na yung anak mo sa gesture, you can just focus on the verbal prompts, like kahit one sound of the target word that you're trying to teach. Like if you're trying to teach borrow, kahit masabi lang nilang ba, you reward it by giving that object na because they were able to ask and not grab. Number 2 is to create a more suitable environment. For this example, kunwari, the impulse that we're trying to control is yung bata, walang tigil kumain ng candy. Basta't nakalatag yung candy dyan, kakainin niya. So what can we do is remove the tempting object from the sight of the child. Especially with very young babies and kids, usually mabilis nilang malilimutan yung hindi nila nakikita. Meron ngang saying that goes, out of sight, out of mind. And that's true. So if hindi nyo pa maturo sa kanila yung self-control or controlling their impulse to keep eating whatever is there, then you need to control the environment or modify the environment by removing the super tempting items first. It's not a very direct coping mechanism of teaching them to control the impulse because actually you just made them forget about it. But it teaches them to wait na, oh, okay, if the candy is not there, then I will just wait for when I see the candy and that's when I'll have it. In a sense, you're still helping them do something about the insatiable need to just keep eating. Number 3, reward self-control and even just the efforts to show that they're trying to control their impulses. So if you've heard of the marshmallow test, diba? This is where they leave the child with a marshmallow and say, if you don't eat that right now, I can come back and give you, let's say, 3 more or 5 more. And then to see if the child will be able to resist, even if the marshmallow is right there tempting them. Studies have shown that children, even if not on the first time, will, after a few trials, have a better tendency to prefer the larger reward, even if it means they have to wait, if the reward that is promised is always granted. What does this mean? So caution lang. If you're going to give them a reward for their patience, for their self-control, make sure you always push through with your reward. Kasi meron ding part ng study that says, if nalimutan yung reward, biglang, ay, hindi ko naman pala nakuha yung mas marami at the end of waiting. In the succeeding trials, they will just settle for, kunin ko na nga to, hindi naman ako sure dun sa bigger reward. So if you are going to reward them with something larger, make sure that you push through with it. That's important for children's expectations. Give them a mindset to prime them for what things to expect. Yun namang reward even their efforts. I don't know how this affects typically developing children, but for my clients kasi who are, have different abilities, even just withholding the answer, even if alam nila and yung kasama nila sa group hindi alam, pero turn niya. So I'm trying to teach them, you can't say the answer because you're not the one that I'm asking. So when I see that they are really trying to not blurt out the answer, after the round, after the task, I will actually tell the person, that was good waiting. I'm proud of you. So you reward even their efforts for self-control. Number 4, you can try games that try to break routine. What does this mean? So, alam nyo yung game na hip hip hooray? So you can do several rounds of hip hip hooray, hip hip hooray. And then after they've gotten used to hip hip hooray kapag naturo sila, and they will either clap or put their hands up, baliktarin nyo naman yung rules. Sabihin mo, for the next rounds naman, yung hip hip naman natin, hands up. Tapos yung hooray naman magka-clap. So that practices many things because first, they need to understand the instructions. So of course, they have to be at a level where they can understand instructions and play games. Number 2, they need to remember na, nag-iba na nga pala yung routine. So that it practices them to stop and think before they do something and not just act on, ito na yung nakasanayan ko, ito na lang yung laro. No, now hip hip is hands up and hooray, it's clap. And before every turn, pag-iisipan nila yon. This is a very subtle but super effective way of trying to have them think before acting. Number 5 is give them breaks. So again, with my clients in therapy, na yung iba sa kanila, it's hard for them to even stay seated for 3 minutes straight. So the impulse is to get up and go around the room or do anything except stay seated. So what I do is, short increments at a time, we will do a task. And after a successful task of them having stayed seated for whatever your target was, take a break muna before you go on to the next task. Because the self-control, may limit yan, especially for children. There are studies that show na parang nauubos. Our self-control becomes spent. Actually, hindi ko alam if for you guys it applies, but when I write reports also, for example, I have to do one, and then after doing one, I have to take a break. Number 1, to delineate that other client from the next one that I'm going to write. And number 2, because my brain, I know, will work better after it has rested. So it's the same for kids. Let them let go for a bit. Do something fun. Let's say you're doing homework or homeschool, whatever you're trying to do. After you do one thing, you give them like 2 to 5 minutes of free play. Just say, do you want now to play with your cars? Number 6, make them see that controlling their impulses has a good outcome. Turn the consequence into something that will motivate them to choose one choice over the other. Instead of parang napipilitan sila to just stop what they want to do, show them that in not doing so, may mas magandang kalalabasan, however that is for your situation. So this especially works kapag meron ng konting reasoning skills yung anak nyo, yung nakakaintindi na sila ng cause and effect, bakit ganito, bakit hindi ganito, etc. Number 7 is be aware of your disciplining techniques. I read this article about the native Inuits, which is a people in Canada and Alaska. And they have a very particular parenting technique where they show zero anger when raising their children. So kahit magkamali, nakatapon, nakabasag, whatever, they really practice not showing a negative emotion to mistakes. So that in itself is impulse control. And growing up, if the children see this kind of control in the adults that surround them, yun din yung matututunan nila, and it will become natural for them to act accordingly, act the same way, to control their anger, control their temper, etc. Ang nakakatuwa dun sa Inuit parenting is they focus on the solution. So, syempre, makakaramdam pa rin ng inis sa loob yung adults. Kinakwento nila in the article that, you know, they have to take a breath, take a beat, and then say, kunwari, nakatapon. Ang sasabihin lang nila, you need to clean that up. Walang, oh my God! Anong ginawa mo? Nakatapon ka! On the flip side of discipline, I also want parents to know that as the parents, they are the authority of the children. I've also encountered parents who are so afraid to discipline their children. And they reason with me saying na, bata pa yan, ganyan talaga ang bata. My thoughts are, Precisely. Bata sila, and now is the time that they need to be taught that there are certain behaviors na akma sa tamang oras, tamang lugar. They just need to be told, it looks like you are having fun, pero what if we do that later? Kasi dito is not the right place. Dito magiging applicable yung, bata yan, is the part where susunod ba sila sa'yo? We can't say if susunod sila sa'yo, but the point is you try to discipline them as early as when they are babies, as early as when they are toddlers, and not ascribe to the thinking na bata pa yan, and that means papabayaan mo sila. And this is because studies have shown that parents who do believe in these kinds of sayings have had children who have poorer performance in school and poorer performances in work in the future. Kasi no one taught them discipline. No one taught them that these are things that you must control in certain places and at certain times. And the last, number 8, is don't forget to keep repeating and reminding them of the boundaries that you set or the rules that you set. So for example, nasabi mo na sa anak mo na, okay, let's try not to grab when we want things, but instead let's ask if we can have it or we can borrow it. So remind them the next time that it happens, makikita mo yung anak mo na grab na naman. Instead of getting mad, understand that if it is not yet a formed habit or a formed value, that they are still learning it. Their memories are very limited at this point. So wag magsawang paulit-ulit-ulit. When they do it again, you give them a reminder that, remember we said that grabbing is not nice, and instead you can ask if you can have something. And then once you've repeated this so many times, even from afar, nakita mo nag-grab na naman yung anak nyo. Sometimes even just this will work. It will remind them, isn't this what I taught you? You ask instead of grabbing. And I know this because this works so much with all of my baby clients. The success rate is great. And that's it about impulse control today. I hope that if nakarelate kayo, that it was able to help and gave you more tips to try with your kids. Behavior, emotions, and feelings and controlling and understanding all of these is so important in the development of their brains and the language that accompanies it. Sometimes they can't learn how to communicate properly because behavior pa lang nila needs work. So that's why when there is a problem in behavior, we try to address it first thing and always on top of every other task that we're doing. Also, people that specialize in behavior are occupational therapists. So you may want to look into that, look up occupational therapy, and if you think that your child needs an occupational therapist before seeing a speech-language pathologist, just get in touch with me and I can refer you to some of my colleagues. If you like it, put a thumb on it and share, and if you haven't yet, I would appreciate if you subscribed. And that's it. Happy week and happy talking.